Hi and welcome back to episode 7 of season 2 of the Canary Room. Coming up on the show today, a return of all of your favourite parts. We've got Bird of the Week, we've got the Canary Room flashback, and of course the Redpole Diaries. Who can forget those little critters? We're coming towards the end of the breeding season now. In fact, the last nest just left, so we'll introduce you to those as well. We've got our top tips and of course question time. As always, sit back and enjoy the show. So you'll remember in the last episode of the Canary Room we had 3 nests with chicks in at various different ages, and I put a note of caution out in that episode that I was concerned about some of the adult birds starting to drop feathers. Regrettably, I think of the 7 or 8 chicks that we had, we did lose a few along the way. In the end, I had 4 in one nest. We finished with 3. They're very nice birds. It's going to be the Canary Room flashback is going to be their father this week. 3 little variegateds in here. We haven't rung them yet. They're still on paper. But we'll ring them over the next week or so when we move them into the main body. You'll notice as we go around the room today that we've moved things around a little bit. So we've put all of the Norwich and the Reds in the bottom cages. We've looked through the 5 hens, the ones that we think we're going to keep, the ones that we'll probably let go. And that's going to be this week's top tip. So that's around the selection of adult birds. But for now, let's have a little look at these youngsters. I'm pleased with these. I'm pleased with the quality of them. We've got 4 still in the nest aside, including another little cinnamon and a couple of whites. So all in all, the Canary Room this year, it's been, with the canaries at least, I'm going to say a very successful season. So we've bred or rung, or will have rung, 53 5 chicks. A little bit down on the 60 that I was hoping to get this year, but certainly a vast improvement on last year's, as you'll all remember. We've got 6 Norwich chicks and 8 red chicks that we've rung. We'll have a little look at the reds later on as we go round the room because they're colouring up nicely now, as are the Norwich. So all in all, not a bad season. That just leaves our friends in the room. It's time for everybody's favourite part of the show. It's the Redpole Diaries. So it's certainly mine, if not your favourite part of the show. It's the Redpole Diaries. What would we be? Where would we be without these little wonders? Well, frankly, we'd probably be a little bit more sane than we are. I'm not going to suggest I'd have any more hair. That went a long, long time ago. I don't even want to say highs and lows of the Redpole Diaries anymore. I just want to say lows and lows of the Redpole Diaries. So you can see behind me, we've got the Cobalt pair. In the last episode, she'd laid a couple of eggs. Absolutely no interest in sitting on them. This was the best pair in here. You'll notice there's just the one. We lost the hen just last week. In fact, we've lost 2 of the Redpole hens in the last couple of weeks. They've started to go into the molt. Interestingly, although the hen in this cage mated, she never built up and she never laid. So clearly something fundamentally wrong underneath there. The other hen that we lost was a relatively young bird. This bird was a couple of years old. The other hen we lost was a relatively young bird. She was had built up but hadn't laid. Now the 2 hens that have laid are both still with us. So I'm not a quitter. The Redpoles are going to be a permanent fixture. Got some exciting news about the Redpoles, which hopefully be able to reveal in the next episode. I've decided that with 2 or 3 pairs and then up to 4 pairs in the season, if I'm going to give these birds a real opportunity in here, then I'm going to need to bring numbers up, and we'll have more of that later on in the forthcoming episodes. So what I'm going to do now is what I've done with the cock canaries last year. I'm going to single off all of the Redpole cocks now, and I'm going to condition them. I'm going to keep them in these cages all over winter in single cages. I'm going to leave the hens in the cages that they're in at the moment. We'll see in a minute that the cinnamon cobalt Redpole hen is still sat on eggs, still in the grit pot. I don't know what we're going to do with her next year. But I'm going to catch these up. I'm then going to put them in the new cages and we'll start to colour feed them for next year. And once we've done that, I want to share with you some plans for a little bit of movement, a little bit of development in the Canary room. So it's the wonder, nay, the magic of television. The cages miraculously are made up. So what we're going to do in a minute is we'll catch the red poles up. Before we do that, although I'm colour feeding the reds and the Norwich in the water now, just to ensure a depth of colour right the way through, I'm not going to do that with the red poles just yet. I may do it later on in the season, but I'm not going to do it just yet. What I am going to do is give them a little bit of egg food. I'm going to sprinkle some of the Carophil red in here now, and I'll give it a little bit of a mix up. So we'll do that, we'll put it in, we'll have a little look at the seed mixture, and then we'll catch them up and pop them in the new winter homes. So that's the Carophil mixed up. We are just going to put it in egg food drawers in each of the individual cages. Normally, I would advise that if you've got, you know, lots of birds together that you're trying to colour feed, that you put it in the water as well, because there's no guarantee that the birds will get a fair share of this. Certainly saw it with the reds earlier on in the season when we started their colour feeding. They weren't all getting it, and some were still very patchy. Now it's in the water, and we'll have a little look at those later on. You'll see that there's a depth of colour right the way through the stud. So I'm going to pop this in. What I'd also want to just chat with is the seed mixture. Now, very difficult with the red poles. The goldfinches need soft seed, so they've got a mixture of wild seeds, of Niger, of dehusked sunflowers, and some blue moor, and that seems to be, you know, keeping them in good fettle, obviously along with the mealworms. I've not put any real hard seed in with the goldfinch mix. Maybe I should, but I haven't at the moment. I've been feeding the same mixture to the red poles. Now, they've been on Canary for a while, and it's just not working for me. So I've blended the two mixtures together now. So it's 50% in essence, the wild seed mix with a bit of blue moor, and then 50% the Canary mix that we use. And as we know, that's got van pellets in. So I'll whiz this up now. You can see the seed mix in here. You know, it's still got quite a lot of wild seed in it. It's got, but it's got a fair amount of Canary in as well, and that should see them right the way through the winter. This is now, you know, it's August. It's now about conditioning them for next year. Now, what we have got in the red poles is we've got a couple of red pole cocks, which are black ring birds. So they are 4-year-old, I think, this year, which means they'll be coming into 5-year-old next year. Now, I've owned one of them for 3 years already. Touch and go. You know, 5 years is an old bird, particularly, you know, in any variety. I know some people will breed with them. I will try them again. They're lovely quality birds, great depth of colour. So we'll put the seed on, we'll catch them up, and then we'll have a quick look at them in the new homes. So I've caught the red pole cocks up now. I'll leave the hens in the cages just for the time being, but I will move those in the next week or so as well. I've taken the opportunity to powder them. They're starting to break into the molt. In fact, there's a couple that have dropped the tail feathers completely. So colour food's on, and they should colour up nicely over the next 6 to 8 weeks or so. Talked a little bit before about the plans that I've got for the transformation of the Canary room. So you'll recall, I hope, from season 1 that we had some flight cages that we had siskins and red poles in last year. My plan is just behind Dan, our cameraman, in that corner, is to transform that corner. I'm going to build some under cage storage, so I want to lift the cages slightly up on the floor, and then my plan is to run a flight cage under the window, another flight cage into the main body of the shed so that they're on an L shape, and then above those on the back wall I'm going to lose one of the shelves, and I'm planning on putting in a set, if you like, of 4 cages, but 2 sets of 4 cages, so I'll have 8 cages in there. So the idea is that there'll be double breeders, which will be for the British. The flights will be for the British. Talked a little bit earlier about the plans for the red poles. Not quite finalised yet, but I'm looking to bring in some volume of poles in the coming weeks, and then maybe run with more birds next year. You know, I've had them for 2 or 3 years, 3 years now, I think. I've bred them, I've had young, and I'm just going to keep persevering. But it's an opportunity that's come up to get some quality stock, and I'll look to take that in the next few weeks. So more of that hopefully in later episodes. You'll notice the drinkers are on. I haven't filled them up yet. What I'm going to do now is take all the drinkers off in the canary room and go and soak them very quickly in some of our Dr. Johnson's sterilising fluid. It's something I do once a week. In the height of the summer, I try and do it twice a week if I can. You know, you don't want bacteria and everything else building up in your drinkers, so really important just to give them a clean through, a sterilisation every couple of weeks. So as you enjoy me running around the shed quickly, I'll take them off, and then coming up we've got Bird of the Week. I've had a lot of emails, a lot of messages on Facebook, and a lot of texts as well about this section and how much people enjoy it. When we were in the production, it was a little bit of fun, you know, let's do Bird of the Week. Well, we've probably got 100 canaries in the room at the moment, so we've got plenty to choose from. Today, first time we've seen a little red, really up close. It's ring number 15. I think it's going to be a little hen. Sweet little bird. It's lost a little bit of its back feather. Bit of a challenge with all of the reds, to be honest. Normally, you know, if I was considering exhibiting these birds, they'd be housed singularly or in pairs, as the fifes are. I'm not. We know why they're in the canary room. They are a beauty in their own right. But what we'd really like to do is use them as foster parents, and that'll be the plan again for next year. More about next year up in top tips in a second. It looks very henny, this bird. You know, have I got the colour feeding quite right on it? Well, it's got a nice depth of red. Its flights aren't as white as I'd like them to be. They're a little bit yellowy, a little bit tinged, so that's not ideal. It's got a little bit of back feather missing on it, but you know what? It's a little sweetheart. I'm looking to keep... we know that Johnny Evans had a pair of reds to help him out this year from me. So I've got the pair that I had last year. That's a green ring, so she'll be 4 years old next year. We'd probably look to replace her, to be fair. And then probably keep another pair from what I've bred. So, ladies and gents, ring number 15. Little, I think, maybe an intensive by the time she's finished. Little red. So we've met this little beauty. It's time for the Canary Room's top tips. Welcome to the Canary Room Top Tips. So on today's Top Tips, we're going to talk about initial selection. Now that's not of the show team. We're going to wait for another couple of episodes until we do that. Although we will take a look at the birds a little bit later on and see how they're coming on. Initial selection is about the adult birds that we're going to retain from this year and that are going to form part of the breeding team for next year. Now, I like to operate a couple of rules in this. There has to be some fluidity. The most important thing to say is that whatever system that you choose to run, breeding your birds has to revolve around the quality of your birds. So structure's great, but if it's too rigid, you could end up keeping birds of a lesser quality just to fit into a structure. And that's not going to do you any good developing a stud forward. So one of the first things that I like to do is get an idea of numbers that I'm looking to retain. When it comes to the fifes, it's based around the cage configuration behind me. So we've got 12 cages for the cocks and 18 cages for the hens. Now, I've run that this year and it's worked well for me. So I think I'm going to run the same thing again next year. So that gives me broadly 18 hens to look for as part of the breeding team for next year and 12 cockbirds. Of course, what I will do, as with any livestock, is retain a couple of extras, certainly hens, just in case birds don't overwinter. So that's the first thing to consider, is your setup and what it will accommodate comfortably with birds for next year. The second thing to look at is nature. So of the 12 fife cocks that I'd planned to keep for next year, I was looking broadly that half of them, so 6, would be birds from this year. And they'd be birds that had bred the very best young for me, regardless of their own visual quality. And that's the second point to make. You're looking, when you're retaining birds, to keep those birds that have bred birds of a similar or better quality than themselves. There's no point retaining a bird just because you like the look of it. Unless, of course, you've got no interest in showing, in which case that's absolutely fine. But if, like me, you're keen to exhibit your birds, one of the key things to do is not just look at the quality of the bird, but it's to look at its young. And we'll have a look in a minute at one of the birds that we plan to retain for next year, and then we'll have a look at some of its young to see why. Obviously, one of the selection criteria is the bird has to still be with us. We've lost a couple of fife cockbirds that were earmarked to be retained for next year, but that's okay. We've got sons from them, and so we'll look to keep them instead. So we're looking for a balance of flighted and unflighted birds with the cocks. The third consideration is where you want the line to develop. And by that I mean, I based us, along with a number of other canary fanciers, I base my stud around families of birds. And it's how you want that family to develop over a period of time. So what's important when you do your selection is the pedigree and the breeding of the birds. So you want to be looking at the birds and how they're bred and making sure that you've got families of birds together. Now, I've had a stud of 5 canaries now in the canary room for 16, 17 years. So all of my birds, even the ones that have come in, are, in some way related to my stud. So that's easy for me to do. We're going to take a little look now at some of the birds that we may retain for next year. And we'll talk about why we've made those early selections. So without further ado, let's have a look at some of the birds. So one of the things that I first talked about was considering the quality of the birds that the birds have bred, the adult birds have bred. This bird here, a heavily variegated buff cock, is a green ring bird. Now, he was born in 2014, so he's 3-year-old this year, and he'll be 4-year-old next year. You can see he's got 2 of 8 birds that are bred off him this year. These 2 are sisters. This is a first round self green yellow hen, and closer to the window is a second round self green yellow hen. Now, those birds were both bred out of an outcross that are bought in from the A&S Kendall partnership. I like the quality of both of those birds, and I like him. One of the other factors that you need to consider is the age of your birds and whether you count them in your numbers or not. So, for example, I've got this green ring bird here and 2 green ring hen birds, one yellow-green self-green yellow hen and one buff self-green buff hen. So they're both green rings, so they'll both be 4 next year, and that's quite old for a 5 hen. This boy will be singled off very shortly, so he'll get to molt on his own, and hopefully he'll come through for next year. If not, I've got sons from him, so his place will be taken by one of his sons. it's important that you look at the quality and you look at the whole nest of what's bred. You're looking for quality across all of the birds. In this boy's case, I ran him across 2 hens, and actually both lots of young from both hens are quality. That's pretty much cemented his place in next year's breeding team. That is, of course, assuming he makes the molt okay. One of the other considerations that you need to make when making your birds is those birds who maybe haven't produced for you this year. Now, with the hens in particular, I've got 2 dark hens that are bought in which are outstanding pedigree and outstanding quality. Both of them went to nest, both of them hatched young, but I wasn't successful in getting young to the bench. Now, what's important with those birds is there could be an underlying factor as to why that's the case. However, there's room for them in next year's breeding team, such as the quality of those birds. Regular viewers to the show will recall that I persevered for 2 years with a self-green buff hen who did exactly the same to me. This time round, I've got 3 stunning birds out of her, which showed it may have been 3 years, but it was very much worth the wait. One of the other considerations, and we've got it with the birds here, is, you know, when you're talking about the adult hens of which birds you retain, the temptation is always to retain the birds who've bred well for you. So I've got birds in the shed who've bred, 8 chicks from, and the temptation will be to keep them for next year. The challenge with that is that you've seen the quality of their young. Now obviously if the quality of the young is outstanding, then that's reason enough to keep the mother. But sometimes you can't keep all of your birds. So actually, to move the stud on and to move the stud forward, you need to be a little bit ruthless. Look at the 2 best hens that bird's bred and look at retaining them instead. And that way you'll ensure that you've got a young, fit stud moving forward. Selection of the birds and the final birds to retain. We're in August now, can be done provisionally now. But as you'll see if we go round the room, the quality of the birds is changing on an almost daily basis. And it would be folly to absolutely lock down the selection now. So I've got a very, very good idea of which birds I'll plan to keep, and I've housed them accordingly. But even in the hens that I'll make a final selection on, there's some that I'll provisionally keep for now that I won't end up keeping in the end. The second thing to say is when you've bought in outcrosses, look at the quality of the birds that they've bred and decide if they've done a job for you. The hen that I bought in from Adam and Sharon has certainly done a job for me. I've put my best cock bird over her and I'm really pleased with the quality of the young. So these birds now are 50% my line. I'll retain these and probably let the mother go. And that's not to say that she's a bad bird, far from it. But the young are a better quality and they're closer to my line. That's my top tips on initial selection. It's time to go back around the room. We talked in the last show about preparing birds for the molt and getting them through the molt. In a short while I'm going to adjust the lighting. It's August now, so I'm going to take 4 hours today off the lighting, which is relatively extreme. Some of the birds which are a bit more advanced in the molt, there's a danger that they'll fall back in it, but I want the lighting to be going off at 4 o'clock now, so I'm going to put the winter lighting on from now. Summer days are still relatively long. It's going dark about 9 o'clock, but there just won't be any additional light in the canary room. One of the important things in this time of the year, we've talked about it, grit. I put grit on the floor before. As we know, the drinkers are still being soaked, so we'll go and get those in a moment. But it's greens, a little bit of broccoli in each of the cages. You can see behind me now, the cages have all got this year's young in. They're starting to take shape. We're going to have a little look at something that's really pleased me this year actually, and that's the development of a white stud. You'll remember I'm sure we talked about it in a previous episode, that the hen white that we bought in last year, we've had 5 young offer and all of them are white, which is for me an absolute first. There's some nice birds coming through, a couple still on paper, so we'll have a look at those in the cage. And then the others that are in the molt, so I'll get them out now. We'll have a little look at the ones in the cage. I'll get them out now, we'll have a look at those on the bench over there while I just finish doing this. So we've seen a couple of the whites that are still on paper. We'll move those in the next couple of days or so. These are 3 from the first round. They're well into the molt, the birds. I think the clear on the end here is a cock. Chances are he will be retained for next year. It'd be nice to have a good white cock bird in the shed for next year. He's got nice shape on him. The middle bird I'm pretty confident is a hen. Again, a sweet little bird, not quite finished her molt yet. In fact, none of the birds have finished their molt, so it's almost impossible really to judge them at this stage. And then a tick bird here on the end. Again, I like this bird. It's nice and up on its legs. I'm not sure, if I was a betting man, I'd say that was probably a cock bird as well. The 2 young, absolutely no idea what they are yet. But what it shows us is that it's probably the first time in maybe 5 or 6 years I've had so many whites in the canary room. I like them, they're a nice bird. You want a pure white. There's little bits of yellow in at the moment, but they've still got to finish off, and you know, we don't know what their end is gonna look like on them. But some sweet little birds, and as I say, fascinating that 5 out of 5 from the nest should all be white. Coming up next on the show, it's the Canary Room flashback. So it's that time of the show again where we look back at the history, if you like, of one of the birds we brought in. This variegated yellow cock we met back in season 1 of the show. We were on a trip to Gerald's over in Barnsley. We earmarked this bird before the show season last year. We did very well to acquire him. He was a class winner at the Midland in the variegated yellow cock class, round about 60 odd birds in that class. Very, very lucky to have him. You'll recall that we didn't know whether he was a carrier or not. And if we have a little look back now, we've got some flashback footage of him in Gerald's room. We didn't know whether he was a carrier or not, and then we saw that he'd bred 2 little pink-eyed birds very early on in the season, so he was confirmed as a carrier. We've run him with 3 hens this year, regardless of that, 3 normal hens. So all the young out of those will be cinnamons, or the young hens, the cinnamon rather, will be hens. And then we've got some other birds out of them as well. The quality out of 3 hens, quality's consistent, and that's really pleasing. Let's have a little look at some of his youngsters right now. So we've just seen 3 sets of young from 3 different hens. A couple of cinnamons in there. There's a yellow variegated cinnamon I like the look of, and I like the variegated buff cinnamon as well that he's bred this year. Definitely one to wrap up in cotton wool, and over the next couple of weeks or so, some of the flighted hens will make way, and I'll be able to single off the cocks that I plan to retain for next year. He's certainly in the contention to be kept for next year. Fingers crossed he makes the molt okay. Coming up now, we'll have a look at some of the green birds that we bred this year. The green fife is undeniably one of my favourite birds. A yellow-green fife hen takes some beating, the markings, the shape. It's been a couple of years and a huge amount of frustration really in getting the dark line back on track. I've had a very, very competitive dark line for a number of years, winning best heavily variegated and best self on a number of occasions at some of the biggest fife shows in the UK. It's taken, as I say, time. I've stuck with it and I've persevered. We saw earlier on in the show heavily variegated green buff cock. This buff over here on the end is one of his sons. The bird in the middle here is bred out of the 3-year-old green buff hen, and the bird behind me here is bred out of a heavily variegated yellow cock that we bought in late last year. So these 3 birds are all related in some way, and I think you'll agree, particularly the bird in the middle and this bird behind me, you know, that green line, that setting of the green line is back, which is really, really important for me. So what I plan to do as I'm doing my selection for next year in the breeding team and also in the show team is ensure that I've got a fair representation of greens. I needed to do a little bit of refreshing because the birds that I had in there were sort of 3 years old and I hadn't quite got the numbers out of them. But what I'm hopeful for is that by the time we're breeding next year, that we'll have that balance. So I'll be looking to keep probably 4 or 5 green yellow hens, and looking to keep 4 or 5 green buff hens, and then looking to keep half a dozen green cocks, whether they be yellow or buff. Quality will determine the final numbers, but that's the mind I've got at the moment. That's the ideas that I've got at the moment. So nice birds, nowhere near finished. Really, really important. I know I'm sick of hearing myself say it, but the birds, you know, we're August now. We're going to change the lighting in a second. The birds are nowhere near finished. Do not attempt to judge them now. Do not dispose of stock now. Certainly young stock. They won't have finished the molt. You won't know what their final shape looks like. But these little greens, I think, are showing some potential. We'll see how they get on over the next few weeks and months right here on the Canary Room. So, as the show's been filming today, we've had the drinkers in the Dr. Johnson sterilising fluid. They're all sterilised, they're in clean water now. I've got our trusty milk container here. I've mixed up a little bit of Origo Stim in it. I like to give Origo Stim once a week now in the molt. That'll just help keep the birds' guts clean and give them what they need throughout the molt period. So I'll top the drinkers up very quickly and then we'll head into question time. Okay, so it's time for question time. Today's question comes in from Pete Wilkinson. Pete says, when is the best time to acquire new stud of birds, or new stock, and what should you look out for when purchasing new birds? Well, Pete, thanks very much. As always, another great question to the show. A couple of things really to consider when you're purchasing new birds. The first thing to consider is what you want from your birds. So do you want to, as I do here in the Canary Room, breed them to an exhibition standard and compete on the show bench across the UK with them? And so my advice really, Pete, would differ depending on what you want. You know, a lot of people, and myself included, particularly with certain species that I keep in the Canary Room, just keep birds for the pleasure of keeping them. You enjoy them, enjoy the husbandry of them, enjoy that aspect. So let's look at the two options. So if one, you're looking to keep them for an exhibition, my advice would be patient. The thing to do is to look and study who's doing well on the show bench, not just a flash in the pan, but who's done well on the show bench consistently year in, year out. If you can, get in touch with them, make arrangements to go and see their setup, get to know them, talk to them. Because what you want to do when you're buying birds is you want to form your own stud of birds. And the best way to do that is to go to one of the successful fanciers. I'd advise you to pick up flighted and unflighted birds. I've always said people always want, you know, I only want unflighted, I only want this year's young. My advice to you would always be, have a look at the birds that the fanciers retained. There's a good reason that those birds are being retained, and a 2-year-old cock bird can sometimes be a very, very useful acquisition to the stud, and that can really kick you on. I'd say go and see the fancier if you can, go and have a look at the setup, talk about the birds, develop your eye, understand, what it is you're looking for. Pick a colour if you like. I always go for quality over colour. Of course, the real challenge as a fancier is to breed colours of quality across the stud, and that's what I'm trying to do here in the Canary Room. You really want to go to contact somebody that you can go back to, because you'll want to get birds in, you know, the following year and the year after that. So a reliable source is my advice there. Develop and breed your own stud. I know some people will take, you know, birds from one stud and birds from another and try and match them together and form their own birds. I think that can be, you know, good advice if you want to build a stud over a number of years. You've also got to know whether those birds work together. So if you get the opportunity when you're in the fanciers, ask him where they bring their outcrosses in from. You know, that can save you time and heartache over years. So, you know, if you know that they go to X fancier to bring in an outcross, then there's a fair chance that they've been there before. There's a fair chance that they know that the bloodlines will work together. And there's a fair chance that you can cut down the amount of time and energy and effort that you have to go through. Of course, if you just want birds for pleasure, if you've got an aviary or a flight, or you no interest whatsoever in exhibiting them, look up your CBS if there's one still around near you. Go and, you know, meet people. You'll pick up surplus birds, really, really competitively priced. Pete, I hope that helps. Thanks very much for your question. That's all we've got time for today on the Canary Room. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. As always, you can get in touch with the show at info@thecanaryroom.tv. You can message us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter and Instagram too. Until next time, take care. Yeah, let's do that. I can't do this anymore. I've lost all of my motivation. It's just a room with birds in. Boom! Yeah! Redpoll, goldfinch, Fife canary, Spanish razor canary, Norwich canary. Both the hens that we, just hang on a second because my daughter's just shouting me. I'm filming? What?